morning, good afternoon, wherever you're listening. Lit happens, viewers, listeners alike. We're here again for episode number 9 of our second season here. And joining me today, we have Belle. How you going, Belle?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Adriel?
That's very good. That's very good. I'm good, thank you. I'm ready for your insights. You presented a wonderful episode before, previously, Tempest, which is seemed to be quite popular amongst our listeners as
Mm-hmm.
well. And now we're
Cool.
moving into the comparative, or previously comparative study. I should correct myself. We're actually moving into Hag-Seed. However, it's no longer the textual conversations text. We're looking at it through the scope of the literary worlds unit for our extension English. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing your insight regarding this. And I know our viewers and our listeners will definitely be encouraged and hopefully have some points of, I guess, inciting points or instigating points, which will allow them to go in and teach this unit to the best of their ability, I think. But yeah, look, other than that, Bill, I think it's good to probably start off with our lit or quit question for the day. So, text specific here. Staging your ultimate revenge plot like Felix turning a prison Shakespeare class into a live action takedown of your old enemies. It's a bit of a word mumble there, but what do you think? Lit or quit?
That's that is so funny. Ultimate revenge plot, like Felix turning the class into a takedown of enemies. Look, I think it's lit, but I think you have to be very bothered, right?
Yes,
But I
100%.
do I do have to say, it is actually so impressive in the novel, the lengths that he goes to, the
Mm,
number of people he involves, all
yeah.
the things that are included to take it to do the takedown. So look, if you're type A and you've got it in you, I reckon you could probably execute that. But I think that's lit.
Yeah.
I think that's hilarious. I don't know. I'm not a very vengeful person, but that sounds hilarious to me. I'm gonna go with
Yeah,
lit.
I like how you sort of just said, well, this is the little bit of the precursor. I'm not a vengeful person, but we could go along
Yeah,
with
maybe that says
it.
everything, but
Yeah, I definitely think it's
ultimate level
I've
of
I'm a
petty. Mhm.
100%. It's that next level. And you know what's funny with our current generation now, you think that would probably resonate with them. And I'm saying our current generation, I'm trying to move away from our generation saying we would be that petty, but look, I can never
Mhm.
put it past us to be honest. But yeah, look, it's a nice little laugh to get us
Probably is.
started and underway
Mhm.
and move us into
Definitely.
the text itself, which again, as we've sort of mentioned at the beginning of the episode here, it's under a new sort of unit now, and we're no
Yeah.
longer teaching this in the advanced English course. We are moving it into the extension 1 course, which I think is quite good in a way because it is such a rich text, and especially like
Yeah.
that adaptation sort of value to the text. It's such a great way into the text. I'm sure you're going to be unpacking this even further. So let's have a look at exploring, what this module is, literary world in extension 1, before we look at the relevance of the text itself and how it applies to this unit. So I'll give you the reins here, and go to
Mhm.
town, inform us, and I'll be listening very eagerly.
All right, sure. Thank you, Adriel. Well, as exactly as you said, this is the last year that you might be teaching Tempest with Hag-Seed, the last HSC year, I should say. And, everybody who has been teaching Tempest Hag-Seed knows that that's no longer the combo and that Hag-Seed has instead moved into extension. I have heard of a
Mm,
lot of people in then going to do Tempest in year 11, which if you
yeah,
listened, I think a couple of episodes ago, we did do an episode on Tempest there and tried to make some connections to how it would fit with year 11.
yeah,
But yeah, we thought since, people are studying it now and maybe I know a lot of people are really strapped for time and looking at how they can use texts that they've studied elsewhere instead of starting completely
yeah.
from scratch. So, extension teachers out there will know that in year 12, students do the module called Literary Worlds. Within that module, there are 5 different elective choices. So, kind of different like groupings or genres
Yep.
of text, if you will. And yeah, so specifically, Hag-Seed fits in with the Shakespearean worlds here. So, what will happen is 3 of the prescribed texts from the list have to be studied, 2 of which have to be extended print, and then a student will find a related text on their own. So just so listeners get a sense of where Hag-Seed fits, these are the other options. So you've got the Arab Shakespeare trilogy, which is a drama text. You've got Hag-Seed, Atwood's prose fiction text. You've also got Merchant of Venice drama text,
Mhm.
which you and I both know very well because we've both taught it before in
Yep.
text and human experience in the previous
Yeah.
prescriptions. So this might be another reason whereas school is like, okay, well, we might just transition it there and then teach with those.
Yep.
We've got A Year in the Life of William Shakespeare, Shapiro's text, which is nonfiction. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead drama, which has been
Mm.
on the prescriptions a few moons ago. Lots of
Yeah.
resources out there. Yeah, and then they've also got the option of doing it with The Big Short, the film. Fantastic. I
Mm.
think that's actually brilliant using an extremely contemporary text and really getting students in that regard to find some resonance to
Yeah.
Shakespearean worlds and ideas. So, yeah, we're going to get into that idea of what the literary world means then. So, I guess here we're looking at how the world of these texts is shaped through the author, through its form, through its
Mm.
language, and also through audience and context. So, if you note that list, I mean, Hag-Seed is one of the well, there's about 6 options there, and you need to do 3. So Hag-Seed is one. So if you might be thinking about which one am I going to do, we're going to talk more about Hag-Seed here, but also maybe in our discussion along the way, there will be
Yeah.
kind of some other connections there. Yes. So we're also looking at audience and context here, and that's I think important to note because you do have some of the texts that are more steeped in Shakespeare's time frame or worldview, but then you've also got some others that are more modern adaptations, like
Mm.
Hag-Seed, that we definitely have to consider here. Now, when we're looking at this idea of literary worlds, they do have to, or they can be classed into different areas. You might be looking at realistic, symbolic,
Yeah.
psychological, fantastical representations. Yeah, obviously, depending on which elective, that would definitely guide you here. But I think with the Shakespearean world, something that, extension teachers might be considering is how can we continue to reference Shakespeare's works, how we might reconstruct it, how we might extend on those ideas, and potentially even subverting those ideas, which
Mm.
Hag-Seed works
Mm.
really nicely for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just a couple more things then in terms of linking back to the module. We want to look at then why Shakespeare's work is culturally valued across time. We want to look at in his worlds where the moments of crisis are, where the power struggles are, where moral
Mm.
transformation occurs, because that's often the didactic intent or messaging within his works. And even in the latter texts or the newer ones, we want to reflect on what are maybe some of the new ways that the cultural values and context are being represented or reshaped. And so, in that regard, students do have to really look at how the textual form and language is allowing these ideas to come through, or perhaps to be subverted, or the ways in which they're translated in a way across time. So, the module obviously also encourages a little bit of creative experimentation with this sense of
Yeah.
literary worlds. But yeah, I think because it's Shakespearean worlds, where you really have to think about not just Shakespeare's time frame, but what are those timeless kind of concepts and values and notions that are constantly being represented in his works and even repeated and then revamped in the newer
Mm.
interpretations. So yeah, that's a little
Mm.
bit of a snapshot in terms of the what we mean by the literary world Shakespearean elective for that
Yeah.
module.
And that's fantastic. And I guess even broadly sort of speaking, when you're looking at the literary world unit, you mentioned
Mhm.
4 or 5 areas there before. I'm not going to use those other 2 numbers as a lot of the students in classes these days will
Yeah,
often have ruined, as teachers will probably be understanding right now.
yeah.
But yeah,
That's
just going back
happened
to
to
like
me
this
3
idea.
times last week.
Oh goodness
Yeah.
me! And they start doing that silly hand movement gesture thing, and you're
Oh,
just like, just please stop it. But I
literally.
think I think one of the cool things that you've sort of mentioned in each of those areas there is the fact that they are like these imaginative landscapes that are constructed
Mhm,
by a composer, and I guess
mhm,
that is one of those key principles of the literary world unit in Extension English in particular. It's like, how does the composer create these constructed landscapes to represent maybe things like, or illuminate maybe the complexities of the ideas of individuals or
Yeah.
societies per se. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the cool things. It's like if you've got a student that's really, really interested in the whys, like we're going beyond that advanced English level. I think the literary worlds unit is so cool in unpacking it, and what better
Yes.
way to address these ideas through Shakespeare's world. I mean, one of the questions that you often be asked as a teacher from a student will be, why do we have to study Shakespeare's world or Shakespeare's works, or and I think this unit is definitely one that will allow teachers to unpack this, and there's just so much room. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a little bit of a smile when you mentioned the Merchant of Venice there, because I'm very disappointed, obviously, that it's no longer part of our human
Yeah.
experiences module, but
Mhm.
it is what it is. Why not? Like this, it's such a rich text as well. And I know we're not talking about Merchant, but wow, imagine looking at that through the
Mhm.
lens or the guise of literary worlds.
Mhm.
It would be fantastic. So, no, thank you so much for sort of unpacking
Mhm.
what the literary worlds module does encompass for us. So, I guess in saying that, then we need to make the connection to our text for today, which is our Atwood's Hag-Seed. So, how would Margaret Atwood's Hag-Seed fit in with this literary worlds module?
Yeah, so it fits because Hag-Seed is a novel by Margaret Atwood, which we are mostly all very familiar with, very modern, contemporary, author like, and it's a modern reimagining of Shakespeare's comedy, The Tempest. So
Mm,
it is, yeah, it is an appropriation of that text and deliberately created as part of what they call the Hogarth Shakespeare series, where authors get approached to create a reimagining of a famous Shakespearean play. And so this was Margaret Atwood's contribution, was her novel Hag-Seed. And so her, protagonist Prospero is reimagined here as
mm,
Felix Phillips, who's actually a disgraced theatre director, as opposed to a once ruler and sorcerer. So you can see already there's that modernity coming through here, and
yeah.
still that idea of like power manipulation creation, but through a more modern lens of theatre directing, the arts, and a lot of, I know we'll talk about the commentary through there too, but
Mm,
other things in terms of this idea of the reimagining of Shakespearean worlds, his character actually uses the play, to the Tempest, to kind of teach and reform as part of a prison literacy program.
yeah,
So
yeah.
again, there's a lot of links to what is, I think, very Shakespearean, what it means to be human, what it means to live in this human world, what it means to manage and deal with crisis, what it means to manage injustice. And
Yeah.
so, therefore, yeah, I think we've got a very contemporary look at, we're not living in a monarchical system anymore, but we're
Mm,
certainly looking at, groups of people in society that are still disadvantaged, subjugated. And so I think that's a nice kind of connection. So the novel is really reframing, Shakespeare, how he represents magic as power, how he represents the strength and art and power of storytelling. So that's very much represented through a theatrical, even a meta theater kind of lens here.
mm,
Um, and also, as well, they would say in terms of literary worlds, because a lot of Shakespeare's text can also be very much this idea of what's in the mind and the mindscape as well. We could look at as well these ideas of fear, isolation, and how these become worlds of perhaps socially made or worlds of our own making, which Felix very much creates this isolation, and his prison is kind of entrapped and haunted by the ghost, if you will, or the imaginary connection to his
mm,
long
mm,
lost past daughter Miranda, which obviously in the play Miranda is alive and well. She's a young lady in the play. In the novel, it's very different. She is like the imaginary representation of who his daughter would have been had she survived a childhood illness. So
Yeah.
this is where I think the novel, I should say, very much relates to this idea of Shakespearean worlds, because it is about pain, it is about crisis, it is about struggle, it is about reinvention,
Yeah.
it is about learning what it means to be human and how we overcome struggles of our humanity. So, very much, I think what this novel does is very much lends itself into those more humanist kind of discussions and philosophical leanings that Shakespeare's text and Tempest definitely kind of starts off.
Yeah.
Lot of questions. Yeah, Tempest has the audience leaves the audience with a lot of questions about how people are treated, how we understand things in our world. And I think that's what
Mm.
this novel does really well, gives us some modern lens in which to consider
Yeah.
that. So I think that would be my pick as to why it fits within this module, and giving you
Yeah.
ideas of what you can do with that to then maybe think about, well, what's another two texts out of that list in the elective
Mm.
that might work alongside, like based on things I've said, I'm already like, well, I could very easily do that with Merchant, could very
Yeah.
easily also link it to The Big Short. So everyone will
Yeah.
have their preferences, but just a few ideas to get people thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you've sort of touched a few really cool points then, especially like the reason why Hag-Seed is this exceptional fit for literary worlds. Like we're sort of again taking it out of that module A textual conversations space and bringing it into the world of the literary worlds in terms of English extension. But I think for me personally, like one of the reasons why Hag-Seed would work really, really brilliantly with this unit is the fact that it doesn't just present like what we would call like just a world. What it does, is explicitly shows how a world is constructed, and it's probably one of the ideas that you're going to be
Yes.
speaking about later on. But I think it's the explicit nature in which it shows how the mechanics of how our worlds can be built through the
Mhm.
construction of the text. I
Mhm.
think this makes it a perfect novel in particular for that literary worlds unit. It's funny, we're going through this, and me personally, when it comes to time to teach extension English, I personally am not a teacher that puts my hands up for that. But it's more so because it's such an intense
Yeah, it's a
subject.
lot of
Not that
work.
I wouldn't,
Props to
yeah,
all
not
the
that I wouldn't
extension teachers. Yeah.
exactly, not that I wouldn't enjoy it. It's just it's a lot of work
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
currently in the season that I'm in at the moment, and probably have been over my career. I'm just like, well, no, I'm actually working on other things. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, like when we're looking at the teachers that have really shown that interest, and I'm really, really grateful that we have had the opportunity to work with some, and I currently do work with some
Mhm.
fantastic individuals that
Mhm.
teach the extension course. But just to sort of see the whys and the hows and this critical nature, like everyone that is a lover of literature would love this unit. Like, if you had the time and the space, goodness me, like, what a day.
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah,
absolutely.
I've stepped a little bit away from,
No, that's
our
okay.
guiding
Yeah,
questions, but I think
no,
it's
you're absolutely relevant. Yeah. Yeah.
important for us to understand, like, why it fits, and in particular, it's this for me, in particular, Hag-Seed shows that idea of an explicitly constructed world really, really well, which definitely
Mhm.
fits in line with this unit. But anyway, in saying that, we've sort of just alluded to it. What are some of those key ideas or points of analysis that we should be considering when it comes to studying Hag-Seed as part of this unit?
Yeah, so I think as well, the reason why this novel lends itself quite nicely to an extension course is there are a lot of like literary theories and lenses as which you
Mm,
can look at to inform, construction of meaning. So obviously we're going to talk about them as I start talking about some of the big ideas within this analysis segment, but just vaguely, looking at post-colonial theories, looking at feminist theories, looking at psychological theories, depending on where the teacher wants to really take this and connect it to the other texts. There's a very it's a very easy fit with those
mm,
lenses of which we're getting our things to students to think about, not just what is the messaging, but where is that messaging being guided and coming from, and having those really academic, more highbrow discussions about it. So it lends
yeah,
itself quite well. So when we're looking at the novel, it's constructing quite a lot of literary worlds here. So on one hand, there is the Shakespearean ideas that it's representing, the tensions, the crisis, the vengeance, all of those things. But
mm,
it's
mm,
also representing those same issues within a more contemporary world. So we're looking at
mm,
the ethics and morality of our prison systems, and
mm,
very much looking at ideas of rehabilitation and reform, which is really a really modern commentary that Atwood is making. We're also looking at the whole staged play, how the play is staged within the play. And so you
mm,
then have a lot of meta theatre and a lot of commentary being made around not just the art of creating a story, and it's not only just showing you the mechanisms of how we put together a story, but simultaneously getting you to again think about the ethics of that idea of a director, or anybody who's creating a form of art has an aspect of manipulation to them. Now, that doesn't necessarily, I think, need to always have a negative connotation, but it's a good idea to have students consider the power of the person that's constructing meaning and
yeah,
messaging. So that's a really good one too. The actual prison program itself and the world of the prison environment will be very unique to students. Very few,
mm,
unless they've watched things on TV, very few of them would get that sense of what that landscape in a prison environment looks like. And then, as I alluded to earlier, there's also the psychological world, very much so what's happening psychologically with Felix, the self-isolation, and how he is mentally trying to cope, and move forward
yeah,
with the reality that he finds himself in, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
No, that's
So
it's
in that,
it's
yeah, go on.
it's funny. Sorry, I'll pull in the meta theater. I love that idea. This world within
Yeah,
a world that you're
very
sort of just
cool.
explaining.
Yeah.
But and I keep going on, and then we'll come back and we'll look at a
Yeah,
few of those ideas in a bit more depth. Sorry,
sure.
I got a bit
No,
excited.
that's it. No, that's great. No, it's actually a great text. If that's what you as a teacher want to
Yeah.
focus on, it's perfect for that. Yeah. So there you can see here there's like layers into how the stories are creating both imaginative realities and perhaps real-time realities. So
Mm,
I like
mm,
that. There's a lot of different levels and layers that you can peel back. Power and control are very much central ideas within I guess both texts, but obviously we're looking at Hag-Seed here. So looking at how power and control is represented within the
yeah,
communities within the text,
yeah.
because yes, you've got like the prison system, but you've also got like the theatrical players and
Mm,
the actress
mm,
that he has to come in and play Miranda. I've actually forgotten her name, but she's a fantastic character. And the way that she kind of parallels the Miranda that he wishes his daughter could have grown to become. And
mm,
so
mm,
there's that deep, like, yeah, the way that art is imitating form, but the way that art is also doing that representation.
mm,
So that's really nice. Prospero controls through magic in the Tempest. Felix has this element of control through theater and his narrative
mm,
direction. So again, that image of like the puppet master pulling a string. And as we read the novel, we know that the tension here is about, he in this literacy program, prison program, he's going to put on this program and he is going to use that as a way to get revenge against the man who not usurped his crown, I should say, because when they're not princes here, but very
yeah.
much this man who usurped his role, and his job, and his acclaim within the theater world. So
Mm,
very
mm,
much here, yeah, Felix's journey is mirroring Prospero's movement from vengeance. And as the story progresses, there's actually from that vengeance to an emotional release, and then that emotional release actually then lends itself to like forgiveness and moving forward. So for Felix, I mean, in the Tempest, Prospero is stuck in this physical environment, and so he's lost his kingdom per se. But for our novel, Felix has lost his entire livelihood.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so the young, unfortunately, he loses his wife. Then the death of his young daughter due to illness impacts on his work. Then he gets kind of usurped, and so for a long time, as the novel's beginning, he's a recluse, and he's living in a world, I should say, of his own making. Very
mm.
much, he's constantly having these visions and interactions with Miranda, who we all know, his daughter is long gone. And so the involvement in the literacy prison program is his step forward
Yeah.
to emotional connection. It's also his platform back into the real world, okay?
Mm,
Because
mm.
he's secluded, not living in the real world, not living a functional, healthy day-to-day life. So it's quite interesting how his job is to engage somewhat in a reform of prisoners, but really in his involvement with them, they are very much reforming him and getting him to question and reconsider his
Yeah.
life, his world, and also getting him to look at the transformative power of art. And very much so, that's what Atwood is heralding in this novel. It's the power of
Mm,
art to teach, to heal, to transform, to show us to move forward. I mean, not only do the prisoners make a really great commentary at the end in terms of what they've learned about themselves and the world through doing this performance of Tempest, but Felix has that very obvious kind of reconciliation with himself, and therefore can move forward with peace. And then he gets this
yeah.
idea of I'm going to go on a cruise. So we've got that link back to ships and water and journeying. So it's very interesting. Just two more quick things that I'll note as well, that the inmates, the prisoners here, are reinterpreting Shakespeare's character and language. So there are some moments where it's quite similar to the play, but there's also a lot of like artistic what's the word, like artistic control or expression, where the
Mm,
inmates
mm.
are simplifying some of the language. One of them turns Caliban's one of his great speeches into a bit of a rap. They're actually, the inmates are discussing these characters as
Yeah.
almost living people, and they're making sense of the world here. So the text is,
Mm,
obviously we've got
mm.
that intertextuality, but because we're not comparing it to Tempest, I think it's really good for everyone to think about. So how is Atwood suggesting then that
Yeah.
storytelling itself is a form of
Mm,
not only creative power, but emotional power. And it's a way for all of us to take back control of our lives, the way that the inmates can take control of their mistakes and try and rehabilitate and move forward, in the same way that Felix can take control of his loss and his
mm,
grief and turn it into
mm,
something good and productive for himself and the world as
mm,
well. Yeah.
mm.
I've got a few
Yeah.
quotes if you think it might be worthwhile
Yeah,
throwing out
yeah.
there.
We may as well, yeah.
Yeah, so there's this really I'll just go really quickly. There's this really great quote, where it's in reference to Felix imagined daughter Miranda, and they say, what has he been thinking, keeping her tethered to him all this time? So
Mm,
this is very much a parallel to how in the play Prospero has to release Ariel and relinquish that control. But in this
mm.
novel, obviously his deep-seated grief has manifested in the creation of this imagined, adult Miranda. And
Yeah.
this idea of that really human idea of, like, in grief we can't move forward unless we let
Mm,
go, so that's good.
mm.
um then there's also that idea of his isolation. He'd been shut off and he'd been frozen in time. Even though there is that parallel to the play, in the novel itself, this idea that everybody's living life and moving forward. And, when you're
Yeah.
stuck and stagnated, you have to have that strength within to take the steps and move forward. Then they also say the play's the thing. So very much emphasizing the meta theatrical nature of the
Mm,
novel, looking at that as
mm.
the tool for power and of even revelation. And then a really great line, Felix's eventual realization: revenge may be sweet, but it's also hollow. So this real shifting him from this vengeance to an emotional release and a bit of a catharsis, which I think is also very, very Shakespearean in himself. Now, there's
Mm,
also a lot of great quotes depending on which character you want to look at. If you want to look at feminine representation and feminism, you might be looking at kind of Miranda's quotes, and the character who is the actress who is playing Miranda with the inmates is a fabulous character to look at. Modern day
mm,
feminist representations, and obviously Caliban is a big one too. If you're looking at colonialism,
yeah.
then you would want to look in the novel in the lines where the inmate that is playing him actually reconstructs him, and they actually have a very great conversation about Caliban's subjugation and about the fact, and even talking about native land rights as
Mm,
well within that.
mm.
So there's so much you can do there, but that's just a few that I highlighted.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I guess if our listeners want more, we'll pop a few of these ideas also that you've sort of talked about and spoken about into our show notes. So keep an ear out and have a look at the show notes because those covered quite a bit here. Just as a sort of recap or summary of some of the ideas that you were sort of speaking about, and I think they were fantastic. I
Hmm.
love this idea that even when you look at like Felix's sort of retreat to that secluded shack in the novel, it's been a while
Hmm.
since I've actually read
Hmm.
Hag-Seed, but
Hmm.
from what I
Hmm.
recall, you know, if we're looking at that in the scope or through the lens of this extension one course, remember we're moving beyond just this plot analysis. We're focusing on those mechanics of construction, as you've alluded to throughout today's sort of analysis here. But I really like this idea of this idea of the shack representing this private world, which you sort of made reference to,
Yes.
and that's
Yes.
defined a lot by that sort of psychological exile that we see. So in saying this, some of the quotes that you've mentioned here, Atwood's using that sensory imagery. She's using that low modality language to describe that hollow space, which is that sort
Yeah.
of psyche that we are exploring here. It
Yeah.
could be that.
He really is an island of his own making, isn't it?
Oh, honestly, it's a world like we see that boundary between the reality and grief-induced hallucination. What does he have? I think you were talking about one of the characters earlier that he refers to as Anne Marie in the play. I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
to represent his
Mhm.
daughter later on, or Miranda, or the
Mhm.
ghost of Miranda. But all these
Mhm.
ideas, even to do with the daughter. I like
Yeah.
this idea of the prison as well, because the prison represents or is like one little part of society or microcosm of society in
True.
particular. And
Mhm.
you look at the idea of the prison now, and we look at our current world as well, and we're confronting questions to do with um, authoritarian rule or totalitarian sort of censorship that is creeping into our worlds. And there's all of these constructs that you can see within the prison itself, within if we go back to the Tempest itself and the island and how it's controlled by the puppet master that we do know. And you're looking at all of these great ideas, but
Yeah.
no, fantastic
Yeah.
other stuff. We'll add them to the show notes as well for our teachers or
Mhm.
listeners. These are just some of our
Yeah.
ideas. There are plenty more ideas, and like for me, it's been a few years since I have actually read Hag-Seed, so that's from what I can recall. Hopefully, I'm correct, and hopefully, I am
No, you were
quoting
spot on.
correctly.
No, you were spot on. Yeah. No,
Um,
absolutely. And that's the thing, it's so rich, right? It's
yeah,
so rich.
yeah,
It just depends what lens
yeah.
you get really attached to, and maybe where your students might gravitate to as towards
Oh,
as well.
hu-
Yeah.
100%, 100%. There's many
Mm.
more, and again, we highly recommend or ask of you guys if you are listening. If you've got any insights, pop them in the comments for us,
Yes,
whichever
please.
platform you're
Mm.
listening to, because we're
Mhm.
always willing to listen and hear from and learn
Mhm.
from the wonderful
Mhm.
brains and minds out there. Because again, we're just presenting, these limited perspectives how we'd approach this, because we do like a
Yeah,
bit of a yarn, as you all have realized now into our
definitely.
second
Yeah.
season. But
Mhm.
anyway, what are some of those, like, let's make this a little bit more practical now. So what are some of those module style essay questions and maybe even thesis ideas that we can get our kids to start to think about for this unit?
Yeah, literary worlds has been around a while, so I think there's no reason why you can't look at some old questions and maybe just adapt them or shift them so that you're not burdening yourself with workload. But
Mm.
if I'm looking at these and the types of questions that I would have is I might have something that's more about the construction of the literary worlds. I might
Yeah.
also be engaging very much so with the enduring value of Shakespeare. So what humanistic values are really translate across time, and
Mm.
also
Mm.
looking at this reinterpretation of Shakespearean ideas. And
Yeah.
depending on which three texts you choose, then you could even get into more specifics for that question. So just a few
Mm.
examples. We thought we'd just create a couple of examples with maybe a possible approach or thesis. So one might be, to what extent do texts that reimagine Shakespeare's world works reshape the ideas, characters, and conflicts of the other worlds? So here, we might be looking at how we are recontextualizing characters, or at least recontextualizing representations of characters, because obviously we're not
Yeah.
doing a straight comparison to Tempest, but looking at how the character traits are representative in some of those other texts on the list. Obviously, looking at conflicts and thematic concerns will be a really big one, because that might be what you're using to connect your text
Mm.
together, like
Mm.
using those big conceptual concerns or human values that are represented, and then looking at how they maybe are shifting to more contemporary social worlds as well. So looking at how they're transitioning from the older text to the newer text through society, politics, cultural values, so that you're still kind of demonstrating what are the core Shakespearean ideas that are enduring, and just how they've
Mm.
evolved
Mm.
in texts across time. Yeah. So some, directions that might take, you might look at how your adaptations are retaining core narrative structures or archetypes from Shakespeare.
Yep.
Certainly looking at archetypes would be a big one here. You might also look at how they transform character perspectives and moral frameworks to suit a new context. So show maybe the evolution from the older to newer.
Mm.
Looking at
Mm.
as well the timelessness of his ideas, and how there is flexibility of these ideas across different worlds and worldscapes. So that's the
Yeah.
first one on kind of reimagining. Yeah. So
Yep.
looking at enduring value of Shakespeare. So the question could be something like, Shakespeare's worlds endure because they continue to reflect changing cultural values and perspectives. Nice and easy, no matter kind of
Mm.
what lens you're going for. So in this one, you might actually be looking at how they endure not just because of their historical significance, but also because the subsequent texts are actually reinterpreting and reframing his ideas and the power of those ideas in a way that they can engage newer readers, new contemporary audiences through the newer cultural values. And so, in that regard, we're revealing this universal exploration of power, identity, morality, and all those things are always in Shakespeare's works. But
Yep.
we're also challenging earlier assumptions of perhaps these universal ideas that were embedded in these original works, and where we're
Mm.
maybe subverting them to an extent in the newer text. So, some points of direction there could be looking at these universal ideas: power, justice, revenge, identity, looking at how the later texts reinterpret these through more modern ideologies or through new genres and text types. So, how perhaps the novel or the film format might be readapting these Shakespearean ideas.
Yeah.
And then also, yeah, also looking at how text can sustain Shakespeare's cultural relevance, which I think is really cool. And this idea of like, sometimes when we think we sustain something, it's got to always be the same, but this, you can still sustain. Sometimes things last and endure if you're willing to adapt and
Mm.
progress and shift with them, rather than seeing them all lost in the old world. So I really like
Yeah.
that. And just as a third point, if you're looking at crisis in the Shakespearean worlds, or new ways of seeing and living through the Shakespearean texts, that might be something like, how do texts that draw on Shakespearean worlds represent moments of crisis to challenge or reshape audiences' understanding of individuals and society? I really like that. So you'd be looking at things like texts that draw on Shakespearean Worlds, using moments of crisis as a narrative turning points, as ways to expose fragility
Mm,
of our humanity, as ways to explore the fragility of social structures, the how malleable our sense of individual identity might be, and this then reshapes audiences' understanding of really universal things like power, justice, moral responsibility,
yeah.
across the original and the new text. So some directions for that. Crisis often reveals these hidden tensions within society or characters. There's certainly quite a few of them within the novel. Like, you've obviously got Felix on that individual level, and then you've got the prison level, and then you've also got
Mm,
the societal level, because I forget what the character's name is, but essentially the lady who has employed Felix to engage in this program, she is like the mouthpiece for prison
mm,
reform in this
mm,
text. Very much, I think,
mm,
representing Atwood's perspective here. So that is really
mm,
cool to look at how those different characters are giving a voice to, like you said earlier, different or marginalized groups in society, to make us kind of consider the tensions across different groups in the world. Also, the way that moments can force this reinterpretation of moral or social frameworks, particularly when we're looking at subjugation and injustice in the novel, and
mm,
how adaptations can often use a crisis to critique contemporary institutions or ideologies. So, very
mm,
much
mm.
critiquing this sort of lock them up and throw away the key, and just looking at potentially how sustainable that is in our modern world. So again, moving from revenge to a revenge to more transformation on a societal, somewhat political level. So yeah, those are
Yeah.
a few different suggestions of different ways to get into the literary world modules, with a question and some suggested approaches. And you might
Mm,
actually,
mm.
as a teacher, consider which of those lends itself to the other texts and kind of backward map from there. But I think we'll talk about that in our last segment now anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So again, as you've just sort of alluded to, I think you've given a lot of great sort of ideas and different approaches there to different ways in which we can look at essay questions and analysis in particular. So again, as a teacher, I guess we'd encourage you guys to just just play around with the language, look what works,
Mhm.
understand where your students are at, because that's one of the key things with extension English. You've often got like a smaller class, but you're working with your students on a more explicit sort of level there, and I guess it's up to you to sort of decide what skills really do need to be addressed. And one of the wonderful things about extension is kids choose to do extension English, so you've got a whole heap of eager kids,
Mm.
um,
Yeah, true.
and I guess this is going back to what I sort of just said before. One of the reasons why I think it's quite a time consuming subject, but having these
Mm.
different ins in which you've sort of just mentioned for our teachers bell will definitely serve to help them. But yeah, are there
Yeah.
any final tips or suggestions that you have in relation to the studying or teaching of Hag-Seed amongst the literary worlds unit?
Yeah, just a couple of quick suggestions. I think it's a good idea to start with establishing the key aspects of this Shakespearean worlds before you start introducing your other texts. So students get kind of foregrounded in, well, what more specifically are we looking at? Because obviously you've got to do three different texts. So there's a lot of
Mm,
ways to diverge there. So perhaps as a teacher, when you're looking at which three you are choosing, if Hag-Seed is, hopefully one of them, you might be looking at the way that some of the universal notions or ideas might be represented across the three, even though obviously the
yeah.
story is different, the focus is different, the context is different. I would say as well, the big thing is to backward map as much as possible from what your like assessment or perhaps an essay question might be, because I know I find this useful for me, that if I know that that's my endpoint and then I backward map, I can plan what ideas or parts of the text I'm going to hit more deliberately, to give students the guidance and the tools to be able to then address that question a bit later. So I think that's a big one. I think students need to, it's a bit like a comparative where they need to understand the plot line of Hag-Seed and their other texts, but it's not a close study, so they have to be really deliberate,
mm,
and maybe you as the teacher, when you guide them, you will also be quite deliberate. Extension teachers are often
yeah,
fantastic, really well experienced, and they know kind of what direction they might be going in, or they know how they're
mm,
going to guide
mm,
their students there, and they will be
yeah,
very selective and encourage their students to be very selective about what they're picking, what connection they're making. In terms of, as well, for Hag-Seed, separate from the story kind of stuff, I would look at what critical perspectives you might be introducing for Hag-Seed, and I think it would be great if those perspectives might be something that would be connected to one or two of the other texts that you are doing in
yeah,
that literary, yeah, because then I think students will see connections a lot better. um, I think when you start the unit encouraging really students to get to that nitty gritty of why they think Shakespeare is culturally valued and relevant. Look, the beauty is they're going to be doing Shakespeare in advanced course anyway. So
yeah,
hopefully they've already gone through that there. But you are just kind of reminding students of that as the approach, and the power of these
mm, mm,
Shakespearean worlds and what they can teach us, and just this ongoing evolution of storytelling, and how really texts are not in a vacuum. They
yeah,
are constantly influenced, shaped, reshaped. And I
mm,
think,
mm.
reminding and helping students see those connections, I think would be very, very useful for this module. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
just
like that idea. I like that idea that you sort of just mentioned, ongoing evolution. This idea that texts are malleable to whatever
yeah.
paradigm that they fit within, I think is definitely something that you'd be looking at in regards to this text. But the fantastic things, I think the introduction of critical perspectives is central to this as well. Remember, extension
Mm,
English for our teachers, like if the kids aren't reading critically or reading those academic journals, I think I've mentioned previously where I'm currently working. If you are afforded or have the budget, I highly recommend looking at a database like JSTOR, which has all of those
mhm,
academic journals, which will definitely help to inform your understanding, or even
mhm.
going to the local library and then just finding and reading. Like
Yeah.
the whole extension
Yeah.
unit is based on the extra research. It's like a mini university
It
tutorial.
is.
That's sort of the way I
Yeah.
look at extension English.
Like a
It
living
gets the kids.
at university.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
exactly right. So, if unless you're engaging with those academic journals and scholarly material there, you're doing yourself a disservice in those university environments. So I think it's a great sort of
Mm,
stepping stone for our students in extension English, especially if they, want to go down the literary world and look at maybe an arts degree of some sort, English text and writing, which is prominent with the two of us in particular, alongside
mhm,
our history sort of majors there as well. But no, fantastic stuff today, Bill. We'll like what a unpacking of the text, and we've just scratched the surface, as we've sort of mentioned as well. If you guys have any thoughts or ideas or any sort of things that you want to be mentioning to us that we may have missed out on, pop it in the comments. We don't get hurt. We actually want to be hearing from you guys, and
yeah.
sort of using this space as a great discussion place for all teachers. But once again, Belle, thank you so much for your insights, your knowledge, your wisdom when it comes to Hag-Seed. I'm sure we're going to have lots of teachers jumping on board this text after listening to Lit Happens and
Mhm,
using that in their own sort of programs and schools. Again, we've got a few resources available to our teachers online as well, on our page and our Teachers Pay Teachers page as well. So be sure to check that out as you guys do continue to listen to us. We just, again, love the support that we are getting at the moment. And moving forward, we've got many more texts to come, whether it be advanced, standard, or extension. If there's anything you guys would like to listen to in particular, just give us a shout, and I'm sure we'll have it coming up. But yeah, any last words or comments there, Belle?
I think just I think for extension it can be so intense. So as a teacher, pick what you're going to enjoy and what you think your students will enjoy. And I know a lot of extension teachers, they try and have a lot of fun and a lot of good discussion. And I think that's the best
Mm,
way. But yeah, hopefully that was
mm,
just a few tips, and, keep doing all the great things that the extension teachers are doing. They're fantastic at their role. And I wish you guys the best of luck with the
yeah,
new prescriptions. Hope it all goes well.
yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys. Once again, we do have all of our socials, so give us a like and a subscribe, and you'll be hearing from us in a week or so.